Thank you very much, Mr. President. Ladies and gentlemen, our speaker for today, Dillon F. Knowles, was born in Nassau, Bahamas, and educated at arguably the best, brightest, and most attractive high school in the Bahamas, Queens College. I can support that. It's not a joke, actually. He went on to McGill University in Montreal and obtained a bachelor's degree in chemical engineering, and further to that, a master's in business administration from Nova Southeastern University. His work experience includes the Syntex site and companies thereon, including Syntex, Roche, Pharmaceuticals, Fine Chemicals, and Honeywell, holding the positions of project engineer, engineering manager, engineering director, and production director. Mr. Knowles also worked at the Grand Bahama Port Authority as the Building and Development Services Director and GB DevCo as the Vice President of Development. Currently, he owns and manages Dillon F. Consulting, a management and engineering consultancy firm. His civic organization involvement includes, of course, the GB Chamber of Commerce, but also the Bahamas Government Land Use Steering Committee and the Bahamas Government Online Government Committee. Most important of all, he is married to the beautiful Sonia Knowles, who is here today, and they have 3 children born between them. That's actually on the paper. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Dillon Knowles.
Good morning, all. Good afternoon now. How do I get out of this? I just want you to know that they had a picture up of me earlier. And while they say cameras don't lie, I believe that I'm a smidgen a little more handsome than that picture. My topic today is, does the Hawksbill Creek Agreement matter? This is a topic which is near and dear to my heart, as I've spent the better part of a decade inside the bowels of the Grand Bahama Port Authority group dealing with this very matter. Let's start a little bit with what is the Hawksbill Creek Agreement. I know a lot of us live and breathe in this city for decades, but not a lot of us have taken the time to understand the details of the agreement, how it came about, what it includes, and what it does not include. So I'll take a moment just to share with you on that matter. 1955, satisfied that the dredging and construction of a deep water harbor and turning basin at Hawksbill Creek and the establishment of factories and industrial undertakings would be of great economic benefit to the country, not just Freeport, to the country. The government entered into the Hawksbill Creek Agreement with the Grand Bahama Port Authority. Now, the agreement, unlike the traditional heads of agreement that we know of between the government and various investors, is actually enshrined in law. It is a part of the laws, the statute laws of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Under the HCA, the Grand Bahama Port Authority has and had some obligations, some of which have been fulfilled and some of which are still outstanding and ongoing. The Port Authority was obligated to dredge and construct and maintain a deep water harbor of specific dimensions. It has done that, and it has since expanded way beyond the original intent of the HCA. Port Authority is responsible for promoting the establishment of lawful enterprises which are likely to be of economic benefit to the country, not just to Freeport. It was to provide land for official government purposes. For example, it has provided land for the 2 government buildings that have gone up in the last 2 decades, and land for the proposed hospital. The Port Authority also has an obligation that in any year, if the proceeds that the government collects from Freeport in terms of taxes are less than what the government pays out to support the operation of government services in Freeport, in Grand Bahama, then the Port Authority has to pay to the government the difference plus 25%. This is a current point of contention between the Port Authority and the government. Port Authority also has the responsibility, or had the responsibility, to construct and operate any utilities that it was needed in a good, proper, and workmanlike manner, and to construct and operate any aviation activities in accordance with the National Civil Aviation Standards. It was also responsible for ensuring that it used its best endeavors to employ Bahamian-born persons within the port area, and also to cause the safety of all building structures, machinery that are erected or installed within the port area, and to continue to promulgate and maintain a comprehensive and detailed building code. Those were the main obligations that the Hawksbill Creek Agreement bestowed upon the GBPA. The flip side of the coin is that there were benefits that were made available to the GBPA and its licensees. And they include that all goods of every kind and description other than consumable, which are personal use stores, may be imported free of customs duties, emergency taxes, and all other taxes. I won't editorialize on that at this point. No real property taxes of any kind by the government within the port area. That expired and then was renewed and expires again in August of this year. That no personal property or capital gains taxes by the government within the port area, like the real property tax that expired and was renewed and expires again in August of this year. And that there will be no taxes of any kind upon earnings. The HCA actually says earnings, I put in brackets income, of consumable stores imported into the port area, manufactured, processed, assembled, or warehoused within the port area, or exported from the port area to a place outside of the country. There should be no export taxes by the government on any goods, articles, or things exported from the port area to any place outside of the country, and no stamp tax or other taxes by the government on monies remitted to any place outside of the country by the Port Authority or by any licensee in respect of their own businesses within the port area. We could all cite examples where those terms have been breached over the years. Another benefit was that only the Port Authority, not local government, not national government, only the Port Authority shall have the responsibility for the administration and control of the port area. That all roads, bridges constructed in the port area by the Port Authority or by a license shall be deemed private roads and bridges, and that only the Port Authority shall have the sole right, not obligation, but right, to construct and operate utilities within the port area, and that they may charge such rates as the Port Authority in its absolute discretion deem fit and proper. Maybe a good thing, maybe a bad thing, depending upon what side of the fence you're on. That neither the Port Authority nor any licensee shall require any building or other permit from the government for any excavation and or for the erection or demolition of any building or other structure within the port area, or for the installation, operation, maintenance, or removal of any machinery, plant, equipment, or other apparatus in the port area. No permit or license is required from government for undertaking any business in the port area except professional undertakings and the sale of alcohol, goods, and merchandise at retail. During the continuance of the agreement, the GBPA or licensees shall have the right to bring into the country and to employ within the port area such key, trained, and or skilled personnel as in the opinion of the GBPA or any licensee, are necessary for the purposes of any and all other businesses, undertakings, and enterprises subject to the government's right to exclude that person because they are undesirable. The Port Authority will not assign their rights under the agreement without the consent in writing of the government. However, the Port Authority may license any entity to carry on any lawful business undertakings or enterprises within the port area on such terms and conditions as the Port Authority shall in its absolute discretion deem fit and proper. So for instance, the Port Authority chose originally to construct and operate the power company, but it chose to license telecommunications to Contel originally. The Port Authority shall be entitled to license any entity to perform any obligation it has under the HCA, provided that nothing relieves the Port Authority of the obligation. So while it may license somebody, it has to still retain responsibility for that obligation being met. With the consent of 80% of its licensees, GBPA may transfer its powers to a local authority, either as a standalone or in common with the GBPA or in common with any licensee or group of licensees. And lastly, the HCA shall continue in force for the period of 99 years from 1955, therefore expiring in 2054. Those are the salient points of the Hawksbill Creek Agreement, points which we take for granted, points that we sometimes feel have been challenged by various administrations, and points that we sometimes feel we have not defended as vigorously as we ought. So the Hawksbill Creek Agreement effectively created a free trade zone in the port area of Freeport, Lucaya. There are more than 3,500 free trade zones in 135 countries around the world. Freeport, Lucaya was the forerunner of free trade zones starting in 1955. Shannon, Ireland is often referred to as the grandfather of modern day free trade zones, but they actually came along after Freeport. There was some free trade zones in South America decades before, but they are not of the nature of the current free trade zones. By the 1960s, South and East Asian countries, including Communist China, implemented their own free trade zones as they saw the economic benefit in doing so. If you look at the chart on the screen, you will note that when these South and East Asian countries implemented their free trade zones in 1965 or thereabouts, the gross national income per capita of the Bahamas was $1,900. None of the Southeast Asian countries on this list had a gross national income per capita that exceeded $900. By 2007, before the global recession, the Bahamas' gross national income per capita had increased to just over $24,000. And most of the Asian countries had essentially caught up. During the recessionary years between 2007 and 2012, the Bahamas' gross national income per capita actually dropped to just over 20,000, while the Asian countries continued to increase. Essentially, over the period 1995 to 2012, the Bahamas' gross national income per capita has been exceeded by essentially everybody on the list. And while our economy has grown by just under 1,000% over that period of time, as you can see in the chart, We have countries like South Korea who've grown over 18,000%, and Singapore over 9,000% during that period of time. The difference being they stuck to their knitting. They utilized their free trade zones to develop export industries, which has raised the level of economic development and the standard of living in their countries for the entire country, not just for the free trade zone. They have created companies that we buy from every day and think nothing of it, that none of these companies existed in 1965, be it Mitsubishi, Sony, Honda, Sanyo, the list goes on and on and on. To put this further in perspective, for the period 1965 to 1999, and I use that window because it's the window where Asia was big in free trade zones, but the United Arab Emirates and the Central Americans, Latin Americans were not yet big in it. But during that period, the average annual GDP per capita growth of the world was 1.6%. High-income nations like the United States of America and Canada had average annual GDP growth per capita of 2.4%. South Asian and Eastern Asian countries who had engaged in free trade zones had average annual growth between 2.4 and 5.6%, significantly outpacing the world and the high-income nations. Conversely, Latin America, Middle East and Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, Europe, and Central Asian countries all were significantly below the world average. It is clear that the application of free trade zones in South and Eastern Asia has significantly improved the economic standards and the life standards of those countries. So what about Freeport? Between 1955 and today, Freeport's free trade zone has been singularly responsible for development of a 230 square mile city at no cost, essentially no cost, to the public treasury of the Bahamas. 230 square miles, by the way, is 1.5 times the size of New Providence Island. So when you think about the effort that the government of the Bahamas puts into maintaining and growing New Providence, multiply that by 1.5 times to give yourself an idea of what the magnitude or the scale of the effort needs to be for just Freeport Lucaya, not the entire island of Grand Bahama, but just Freeport Lucaya. Freeport Lucaya has over 400 miles of paved roads and the infrastructure that goes along with it, water mains, power mains, telephone lines, cable, TV, and internet lines. It has an additional 400 miles of unpaved roads in subdivisions that have been platted but have not yet been serviced. It has a world-class airport, harbor, container port, power plant, water plant, and telecommunications. We may argue about their costs, but compared to the rest of the region, they are world-class. The Hawksbill Agreement also has been responsible for the development of export industries, including all of those who resided on the Syntex site between Syntex back in the 50s to Pharmachem today. Companies like Borco, the former Bahamas Cement, Polymers, former Bahamas Princess, the Grand Lucayan, and other companies that have been here or are currently here who are engaged in export of goods and services. Now, export, as we all know, are wealth generators, and those of us like myself, who are engaged in the domestic market are really engaged in support of that and the distribution of wealth among residents. So it's important that we continue to do what we need to do to generate more investment in export industries, whether it's exporting of goods or whether it's exporting of services. Anybody who's getting paid in foreign currency is adding wealth, and anybody who's getting paid in Bahamian dollars is spreading wealth. We have, the HCA has also been responsible for the development of over 2,500 licensees of the Grand Bahama Port Authority, over 90% of which are Bahamian owned. All of that has been able to support a population on Grand Bahama of some 50,000+ residents, each of whom pay taxes to the Treasury of the Bahamas, just like the residents of any other island, with the exception of New Providence, who also pays real property tax. So, in a nutshell, the free trade zone has been good to Freeport and has been good to the Commonwealth of the Bahamas to date. There's still much, however, to be done. As Kevin alluded to earlier, the government has created a committee on the Hawksbill Creek Agreement, and particularly on the concessions that sunset in 2015. The Grand Bahama Chamber, with approval of its board of directors, has accepted the government's appointment of our president to that committee. The Chamber intends to use that opportunity to voice the issues, concerns, and/or recommendations of its members, prospective members, and the business community at large, with a view to jumpstarting Grand Bahama's economy in the shortest possible period of time while creating a framework for long-term sustainable economic growth and development for the entire island. The following is an outline of the committee's objectives, their terms of reference, and the Chamber's recommendations to government for your consideration and your input. And at the end, we will take questions, and we will also ask you to fill out a questionnaire, which will help us to gather even more widely your opinions on this matter. Terms of reference number one for the government committee is, and I quote it, just so that nobody says that I got it all wrong. Terms of reference number one was to agree with the Grand Bahama Port Authority and principal licensees a long-term economic development plan which both protect and promote the shipping, industrial, logistics, tourism, real estate, and other commercial sectors as the focus for Grand Bahama Island. In September of last year, the Chamber put out a document that we entitled Vision 2015, Freeport's Future. In that document, we made some recommendations that can be attributed or applied to this particular terms of reference. Can you hear me? Did I lose the mic? On. You could hear me? Yeah. I'm normally soft-spoken, so I wasn't sure. Wife ran out on me. Recommendation number one was that Port Group Limited and Hutchison Whampoa are to be encouraged to develop the sea air business or logistics center, as we know it, the area between the harbor and the airport. Expansion of the Freeport Container Port's foreign trade zone to include the adjacent sea air business center and the international airport would support this endeavor. And acquiring U.S. Customs pre-clearance for cargo from this proposed sterile zone would be a game changer, as we would be able to operate in Freeport as if the logistics center was in mainland United States of America. We also proposed that the government develop an international level maritime program at the College of the Bahamas, as maritime affairs are a significant component of the Freeport model. We recommended that the tourism product be redefined to focus Freeport-Lucaya, the city, on upscale, high-density resort development, including conventions, marinas, medical, educational, golfing, sporting, and second home tourism, while focusing East and West Grand Bahama on niche tourism programs, including cultural and ecotourism products. We believe in our heart of hearts that we must drive these by developing experiences and not just edifices. Tourists go to experiences and they stay in hotels. They don't go to hotels and then look for experiences. We have to put the horse before the cart. We also believe that there's an opportunity for a domestic and international arbitration center to be developed in Freeport. This would ease the court burden of domestic legal disputes and also provide an opportunity for the Bahamas to trade services in this regard with the outside world. We believe that we need to articulate a concrete strategic development plan such that small businesses can invest in supportive roles. Too often, key anchor projects come to Grand Bahama with no warning. We didn't know that they were coming, we, the general community. We have not the ability to prepare for them, either by preparing workers or preparing our own businesses to be able to support those industries. And as a result, industries, small businesses, and workers come with those companies in order to be able to support them in their formative years. These are years that we miss out on as an opportunity. We slowly begin to chip away at it, but if we had a strategic plan and we knew that, for example, we were going after a shipyard, then we could have planned as businessmen to be able to support a shipyard. But we didn't, and so we're playing catch up, as an example. We also believe that from a small business perspective, we must encourage the Bahamas Development Bank to strategically, not just commercially, but strategically support domestic investors who are proposing touristic activities and attractions that capture our cultural and environmental assets. One of the reasons why the South and Eastern Asian countries benefited so much from their free trade zones was the government put their money where their mouth was, supporting industries that they didn't own, but that they wanted to see flourish in that zone. We must do the same with small business development here in Grand Bahama. We also believed that the Port Authority and the government in their respective areas need to do something about the beautification of the island, and that there's an opportunity to privatize the maintenance, especially on the eastern and western ends, as small business opportunities. We feel strongly that education is key. We could bring in all the investment that we want, but if we can't provide them with the human resources they need to operate, we gain little. So we believe that we must adequately fund schools and develop adult and technical education curriculums, and we must increase, not decrease, the standards. Additional considerations relate to banking, where the bureaucratic requirements are impeding development, both domestic and foreign investments. The legal system, where the impediments cause us to spend oodles of what would otherwise be productive time trying to get court time, trying to resolve matters that should and could have been dealt with more expeditiously. And we believe that there's a serious need for a top-notch medical facility which would allow for those who are interested or have considered coming to Grand Bahama as residents, particularly in the second home ownership and the medical tourism field, to feel that they are supported in their medical needs, as most of these individuals tend to be on the upper end of the life scale and the end where medical facilities are very important. In recent times, since the terms of reference, the committee has been created, the Chamber has also thought that collaboration between the GBCC with the GBPA to reestablish an incubator program for small business development and organize a venture capital fund to assist entrepreneurs with financing on-island innovative and complementary businesses is important. Terms of reference, item number 2. Government has commissioned the committee to create a framework for immediate and long-term investment promotion on the island to attract investors which can operate assets competitively at a world-class standard and effectively and efficiently utilize the land resources with proper environmental safeguards. Our recent thoughts on that are that, consistent with the undertaking in the 1993 Freeport Act, where the government agreed to extend the then sunsetting exemptions that are now sunsetting in 2015, and in accordance with the Port Authority's responsibility under the HCA, that GBPA and GBDevco collectively need to establish an organization to promote Grand Bahama internationally on a more strategic mindset approach than we have had over the last couple of decades. We believe that promotional activities over the past 15 years have been tepid and ineffectual, and hence this covenant should be viewed by government as unmet and needs to be revisited by GBPA with the technical assistance and involvement of the central government, licensees, and other stakeholders. Terms of reference number 3 states that the committee is to ensure that the mechanisms are in place to align the Grand Bahama Port Authority's quasi-regulatory authority with the policies of the government, and that a regulatory framework exists in keeping with present and changing international best practices. In our previous paper, the Chamber had recommended a negotiation of a transfer of the Grand Bahama Port Authority Limited, the regulator, not Port Group Limited, the asset holder, to an independent trust or similar vehicle. We believed that it would create a GBPA board formed from licensees and other stakeholders, including the government, that it would provide for transparent administration of the HCA and regulation of municipal services, that it would eliminate the conflict of roles between GBPA and Port Group Limited management and the conflict between those and the government, and that by transferring the regulatory powers, we would prevent any issues that would come up should there be another shareholder dispute. We also believed and recommended that the role that the government plays in the administration of Freeport should be rolled back to the original intent of the Hawksbill Creek Agreement to reestablish the essence and the benefit of the free trade zone. We need to return to the original terms of the HCA as it relates to the one-stop shop approach to business licensing, easy import of non-consumable goods, ready access to needed skilled labor, and a welcoming approach to business visitors. More recently, on the issue of the GBPA as an independent trust, we have massaged our wording to suggest that we should approach the principles of the GBPA after obtaining the formal consent of the central government and the prescribed 80% of the GBPA licensees respectively with a view to negotiation the devolution of the control of the GBPA to an independent stakeholder trust or a stakeholder cooperative would be the best way to describe it, or similar vehicle. Such negotiations must be and seem to be done at arm's length and without compulsion. This action is critical in order for the GBPA to be independent in appearance as well as in fact. Recently, we've also revised our thoughts on the role of government, mindful of the demands being placed on the country by the external agencies such as the OECD, FAFT, and IMF, to name a few of those alphabet soup agencies. To comply with the international best practices and the government's stated intent to accede to WTO, the GBPA's growth and development policies must be harmonious and consistent with those of the country at large. In essence, the terms of the Hawksbill Creek Agreement need to be recognized, respected, and preserved by the central government. However, when necessary, any terms which are incongruous with the country's national development plan will necessarily have to be revisited and amendments mutually agreed to by the government, the GBPA, and the licensees. The last term of reference is for the committee to agree a suitable framework for property tax and business license that would not impede economic growth and contribute along with other suitable measures to the enhancement of government's revenue base. That's how they would, not me. Previously, the Chamber has recommended that Grand Bahama should be viewed as a fiscal solution for the Bahamas. That growth in Grand Bahama from Hawksbill Creek Agreement redefinition would significantly assist government with its fiscal reform agenda. That Freeport alone has the potential to comfortably facilitate up to 300,000 residents, which, if realized, will cause a commensurate increase in net revenues generated for the government. As I said earlier, Asian and United Emirates countries have used the Freeport model to surpass the Bahamas. Taxing Freeport, we believe strongly, eliminates this potential. Previously, we also recommended that the government conditionally extend the 2015 exemptions until 2054 on the basis that a failure to do so will end up in a reduction in government revenue, as critical mass has not yet been reached to sustain this economy, and additional taxes will result in losses of local and foreign businesses and will place already struggling property owners underwater. An extension, however, will maintain a competitive edge over the regional competition for foreign direct investment, resulting in increased development potential and more government revenue. And lastly on this, we now also add to those recommendations a recommendation to roll back VAT on licensee to licensee services. The matters that we have raised in this presentation are based on feedback that we have received to date from you, our members, and our prospective members. We are interested in hearing your various issues, concerns, and/or recommendations. We have handed out at your tables questionnaires related to this, which we would like for you to take the time to complete before you leave today, if possible. Your comments will be treated confidentially, but it's important that we speak to the government in one voice and that we're not in a divide and conquer environment. I thank you for your attention.
Ladies and gentlemen, at this time, I know the hour is late, but if you have any questions for Mr. Knowles on this very important matter, he is available to answer any questions. So the floor is open for any questions and feedback.